In Luke chapter 10, we'll get there in just a moment, but I did not want to move on with sermons until I finished distractions. And we have more sermons in that series besides cell phone. It's not just the phone. It's not just the smartphone. We'll define distractions in just a moment. But by the way, every 4.6 seconds, it takes 4.6 seconds it takes to send a text message if you don't look up. And of course, in that time, you can go at least the length of a football field. And 46 out of 50 states have banned texting and driving. And, that really, they're saying the studies now, the states that are the toughest with that law, and it's hard to police that one. But they say the states that are hardest with that law actually have more wrecks because of texting, because here's what they're doing. So if they're not looking, you're right here. But if you know you're going to get in trouble, where you go? Nobody's going to answer this, are you? You go down here. And the further you go, the more distance there is between your eyes and what you're doing. And the more time you spend looking at the phone, and of course, tragedy can strike. But the phone is not the only distraction in this life. And we went over, and I want to go back over a couple of things that we talked about last week, if I may. Digital distractions, number one, we said promote procrastination. They take our focus from what we should be on to something else, whether we're at work, whether we're at school. It's an escape. Number two, we said digital distractions promote disinterest in others, and we're going to elaborate on that in just a moment. But it gives an air of superiority and disinterest in another party. And if you've ever seen anybody that has their phone up looking around, then it says to you, I like you, but not enough to put my phone down. I like you, but not as much as I like what may be coming in on my phone. So it promotes a disinterest in other people. And third, we said digital distractions promote spiritual passivity. It just utterly numbs the soul towards spiritual things, and we're going to elaborate on that in just a moment. And I repeat, Pascal, as I mentioned last week, I've discovered that all the unhappiness of men arises from one single fact, that they cannot stay quietly in their own chamber. So in other words, men and women, teenagers, have problems facing themselves. So they're looking for a diversion, an escape. And by the way, that escape can come in any form. I don't have a smartphone. I don't have this. Hold on a minute. You worry yourself silly about everything that never happens. That's a diversion. That's something, an escape outside of trusting in the one who holds tomorrow. And so it is a distraction just as much as a phone is. But staring at the ceilings of our quiet bedrooms, he says, with only our thoughts about ourselves, reality, and God is unbearable. Hence, it comes that men so much love noise and stir. It comes that the prison is so horrible a punishment. It comes that the pleasure of solitude is a thing incomprehensible. Now, to be without the availability of this distraction that we call a smartphone or any kind of electronic gadget or device is solitary confinement, a punishment to be dreaded. That's why you see this today, and I can almost guarantee you I can pick it out. If Jordan or somebody around, and I'm not picking on Jordan, but he's easy to pick on, and he lets me pick on him. But if he's like most of us, if tonight he looks beside him and he can't feel his phone, and he looks and he can't find it, and he nudges his wife while I'm preaching, where's my phone? and she's looking for her phone and his phone and digging in her purse, and then all of a sudden you can forget the rest of the message. He ain't listening, and neither would you. And this is not for the younger generation, Judge. You let somebody in the sunset years of their life misplace their phone. Oh my goodness, you talk about a tornado, hurricane. You hadn't seen the wrath of a person that's and looking and go, I mean, utterly in chaos. Right. I've got it. Or the second best thing is for the battery to be on 5%. And just in a nervous jerk about this phone, and I get it. I understand ministry for me is highly attached to my digital devices. I get it. But we can't blame it all on ministry. We can't blame it all on family. And we can't, and by the way, God never intended you to put your family before him. And that's another thing that we could discuss. But you let somebody, you let them lose their phone, and it's almost like they're being put in prison, and they get frightened and scared that they've lost their phone. I've seen it. You let it happen at the hospital. You let it happen when you're sitting around and afraid somebody might grab it and be gone. And my goodness, I mean, just all the time looking. And even right now, since I've said that, several of you have looked to see where yours is at. Just because I said it. Now, we have 1,000 reasons to be sobered by self-reflection. We have 1,000,000 reasons better to be held in check by reflecting on where we are in our spirituality. What's our quiet time like? What's our devotional life? What's our reading pattern for the scriptures? What's our study pattern? What's our meditation pattern? What's our soul winning life like? And we have 1,000,000 reasons to reflect on where is Pastor White right now, spiritually speaking, in light of the resurrection, in light of the second coming, in light of the judgment seat of Christ, where am I at spiritually? We have 1,000,000 reasons to be self-reflective. But it's a lot easier to download a 99-cent game or have a 10-second download or look at something that you have no intentions in 1,000,000 years of purchasing. It's a lot easier to evade self-reflection and look at some passing thing. And I said this statement last week. And by the way, those pings and alerts and push notifications, they're like dopamine. They are. And they excite the nervous system. And put if you don't believe it, just let one go off. Just a ping, and we may not say it, but we're listening for we know our ping versus somebody else's ping. And so and some people have very, very distinct tones and things as such as that. Amen. What does it do? It numbs the sting of emptiness. And I said this, we turned this new and powerful antidepressant of a non-pharmaceutical variety, our smartphones. Yes, and may God help us to pay attention when we're being consumed. And we've talked about that, and I don't want to re-preach it. I got a lot more to talk about tonight. But I want to give you, in just a moment, I'm going to give you some questions. But what does these distractions do to us when they're left unchecked? How do they affect us when they blind our souls from God? And, what are some other distractions that are equally dangerous? And by the way, the phone is not the most dangerous. Worldly worries, anxieties, pursuits of wealth, self-centered concerns with personal security that suffocate our soul. They snatch away the seeds of truth, even in a meeting like this. Thoughts about tomorrow and how you're going to climb and how you're going to make more and how you're going to pay that bill and how you're going to take care of this problem, how you're going to restore this issue. All these things, what is that called? It's a distraction or the worldly care. Or some of you right now are thinking about all the garden you got to get planted and the grass you got to get fertilized or the grass you got to get mowed or the tree limbs you got to get. And some of you already baked. You baked this morning, but you're baking again tonight for tomorrow. Probably baked 3 or 4 cakes this morning, cooked a ham, all in the time 11 and 12, between 11 and 12, in church. You men have fixed more cars sitting in church than you've ever fixed in the garage. You've solved more problems, more financial issues. You've made out more budgets sitting on the pews of a Baptist church than anywhere else in this world. Made more investments, caught more fish, fixed more small engines, took care of your daughter's dates, ways you're going to suffocate them and tie them up. And Brother Fredericks has done that recently. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I mean, we think of, isn't it amazing what you think of? And that's why, I do this right now. I don't do it on this notebook, but when I'm in there, I was in there on my face this past week, and I'm not saying that to be, you ought to have a preacher that spends time on his face. And I'm not saying that boastfully, but I did this on purpose because I found out that Satan don't like that. He don't like it. And man, when I need to, I can't think of anything I need to think of. And you the same way. That's why I write stuff down. I put it everywhere I can put it. But there's one time when I think of everything in the world except what I'm focused on. That's prayer time. I can think of I can fill up a to-do list in 5 seconds or less the moment I start praying. So now I do this, and I've said this publicly. I'll get those old calendars we have with that glossy back. I'll get out an old Sharpie that I bent the tip on, and I spend at least 3 hours at a time, 2 to 3 hours at a time, writing birthday cards and anniversary cards. So after about one setting, I've wore out one of those Sharpie blue, and just pressing hard and taking out first. No, I'm just kidding. And so I'll get one of those bent ones. I don't want to throw them away, not be wasteful. So I'll get one of those bent ones. And as soon as I start praying, stuff will start coming to my mind. Right. People I need to see, things I need to do. Right. The dry cleaners. Dry cleaners closes at 3. Get your clothes from the dry cleaners. Now, why don't you think about that when you're sitting at the stoplight? That's right. It's praying when you're thinking about that. And just unload your mind. Because if you don't, and there in a minute, I'll get it all off. And then I can get down to praying like I need to. So I don't have that problem. Well, that's fine. You do it your way. But I just know how it kicks in when I start reading my Bible and praying. That's right. I think of things that I forgot. Some of you men ought to start doing it. You might think of your wife's birthday, anniversary. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. It's amazing what will happen. Amen. But we get so confused, and Martha did this. Martha was so distracted by her table of service for others, she missed the importance of Christ's words for her. She was so busy. Martha, Martha, what are you doing? I mean, you're not doing anything bad, but good night. The Son of God is in your house. And you worried about all this doing and fussing at everybody because the macaroni and cheese is burning. And there's still dust on the doorstep where Peter came in, and you're fussing and running and stewing and getting mad and angry. And Jesus is right there. And she was highly distracted. And you say, well, Pastor, and that's how the devil is so subtle. It doesn't look like a terrible thing. I mean, good night. How can a time management tool on your phone be so evil? When it takes the very time that you set aside to be with God to figure it out, that's when it becomes evil. Amen. How can this new fix-all app be so evil? When you spend 3 days researching and then find out it's a paid app and you don't want to pay for it, and you just wasted 3 days to figure it out. Well, we waste time, don't we? We do. And Satan knows if he can get your time, he's got your life. Time is life. Time is life. We can become unfocused, and that we get lost in this unforgiving wheel. And it's not just phones. Some people are so service-oriented, and that's wonderful. But if you get locked into this wheel of service and you forget who you're serving, you will burn out and crash faster than you can shake your head. You will crash. When you put so much emphasis on doing, and you bypass 10 times a day the one that you're supposedly doing it for. Like I said on Wednesday night, you drop your book bag on the table and take off running like the little kids do. All the while, he's standing there at the door wanting to commune, wanting to fellowship. And we don't do that. We fail to pray. We fail to seek him. We fail to see him. We fail to listen to his voice, to draw. And then what happens, God feels and becomes more distant. And by the way, the more distracted we are digitally, the more displaced we become spiritually. Amen. The more distracted we are digitally, the more displaced we become spiritually. I'm convinced of that. If you can prove me wrong, you do it. I'm convinced. The more distracted we are digitally, the more displaced we become spiritually. And I'm convinced of it. One pastor wrote this: why do you think young Christian adults struggle most deeply with God as a personal reality in their lives? He replied, noise and distraction. It's easier to tweet than to pray. Prayer is hard work. Commune with God's hard work. We'd rather tweet it or talk about it than actually do it. And it's just so easy to tweet it, to put it on social media. That's no match for the labor of prayer. Right. No match. If your flesh had a choice between Instagram or 30 minutes in solitude with God, I promise you, your flesh would choose that every time. Right. Every time. I'm going to ask you some questions, and we may not get much further, but I got a lot more stuff here, and I'm going to give you the ones I have down. I want to give you these questions, and I want you to look at them. If you're able to write them down, write them down. I can get them to you if you need them. But I want you to check some things tonight. Yes, sir. I want you to check. Number one, and by the way, put whatever you want to put in this blank. Do my smartphone habits expose an underlying addiction to untimely amusements? Good. Now, you could put anything in there. You say, I don't have one. Okay. Well, you put washing and waxing your car in there then. Right. You put buying shoes in there. Come on. You put crocheting when you get mad at your husband in there. Every time you go back through there, you're almost like you're stabbing him, Got a little voodoo doll. You and just do it like that. Mad. Number two, does your smartphone habits reveal a compulsive desire to be seen and affirmed? This is a big one. Do you not have enough confidence in who God made you that you have to display and be affirmed on every decision you make, everything you do? You've got to post it for affirmation. We get our affirmation from God because there's going to be one day when nobody notices your post. That's right. Amen. God always notices. Our affirmation comes from God. It doesn't come from expensive toys. And gentlemen, ladies, don't check out on me. Those of you sitting here with $70,000 and $80,000 vehicles, don't check out on me. That we got to have them because they give affirmation in the community, or we got to have a certain position, or we got to be in a certain spot financially or a certain spot socially to be accepted and affirmed. Our affirmation comes from Jesus Christ. It doesn't come from tweets. It doesn't come from likes. It doesn't come from dislikes. It doesn't come from cars. It doesn't come from nails or new hairdos or new dresses or new anything. Affirmation comes from God. Now, gentlemen, those of you who are married, you ought to affirm your wife. But true affirmation, lasting affirmation, foundational affirmation comes from God. Because one day, ladies, he's going to forget to tell you how pretty you are. And one day he's not going to say, hey, he's not even going to notice you got your hair cut, which fellas, don't do that. That's not good when you do that. But he's not going to pay any attention that you got your hair fixed. The gentleman, you got to get that one. But one day he's not going to get it. He's going to be fishing somewhere, or he's going to be doing something. Even if he ain't gone, he's in his mind. Or he's working on the car. He comes up to the house tired, hands greasy. He don't notice your hair. And you're going to think it's over. He didn't even see my haircut. But you know what? Gentlemen, you ought to see your haircut. I'd a whole lot rather look at my wife's hair than some car. But listen, there's going to be a day, only God. What are you going to do to some of these dear widow ladies here? Who's going to affirm them? I'm thankful, Miss Peggy Hill. You know where our affirmation comes? From the Lord. From the Lord. Hey, when you ain't got nobody else to depend on, our affirmation comes from Him. And you're going to be sadly disappointed if you're looking at anything, a job, a person, a relationship to affirm who you are in Christ. Right. And we see it all the time. People, why do these teenagers do crazy stuff? To be noticed. Yes, sir. Because nobody, they're not affirmed. Daddy's not done a good job. Daddy's not told his little girl how pretty she is and how much he loves her. Daddies, there's no substitute for that. There's no substitute for that. There ain't no other man got that job till she gets married but you. And so if you don't do it, let her mama do it. Mama can't do that. That comes from you. But you know what? We need affirmation from God. Any other place is sinking sand. You get affirmation. I've seen adults. How many of you have seen adults live their life through their kids? We've all seen that, haven't we? Yes, sir. One day your kid's not going to do what you think he ought to do. He should have pitched a shutout and he didn't. He should have made it to the next level and he didn't. Or she should have made it and she didn't. What's going to happen then? I've seen people, all their world was built around their kids and their athletic abilities. Right. I've seen people who all their life was built around their kids and just their kids. Right. And we ought to love our kids. And that's up there. God first and His work and then home. But can I tell you, they're going to let you down. They're going to let you down. If your affirmation comes from anybody but Jesus Christ, you're going to be let down. Amen. Same way with social media. And there's people, and I believe as a church, we ought to be on social media. We ought to be, if we can spread the gospel out there, as much filth and evil as there is, we ought to do it. And I think you as a believer, if you need an avenue, I think it's a great tool, great avenue. But that cannot be your source of worth. Amen. Is how many posts you have, how many likes you have, how many views you have. I see teenagers now, that's all they do all day. It's like a party time when they got 5 more likes or 5 more people trying to follow them or 5 more acknowledgments on any kind of social media. It's like you just bought them a new car. They're checking, and then when they don't, what happens? They're on the way down. Yes, sir. They're on the way down. I think teenage suicide is only going to skyrocket. The more kids look for affirmation through social media and they don't get it, or they get bullied, or they get and it's going to head down. Number 3, does my smartphone habits or whatever habits distract me from genuine communion with God? I've heard people say, well, man, I get down there in the wood shop and me and the Lord just really, I'll be honest, you go ahead, sir, but I got a hard time believing you can run a router and pray real seriously. Come on, that's good. Right. You can do it. I can't even run a router, let alone pray and run a router. But it's funny how we'll substitute every other thing. Does your smartphone habits or any other habits distract you from genuine communion with God? Number 4, do smartphone habits provide an Verse number 27, and he answering said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God. We have a lot of stuff in our lives that disengage us from the needs of our neighbors. And many times when we go into social media stuff and we vegetate and gravitate to our digital devices, too often we use social media to insulate us from the real needs of our friends. We get so used to seeing news like that. I mean, post after post after post after post after post of somebody in need. I mean, that's all you're seeing. After a while, you become numb to everybody in the world that has a need. Then when you see a real one, you don't respond like a Christian would respond because you've been seeing this stuff all week. You've been seeing people post about it all week, about financial needs, about physical needs, about spiritual needs, and about needing God to do something in their family. And you've been seeing that all week. So it just numbs our soul and spirit to real people. It places us in a virtual world. And I want to say to you tonight, God has not called us to minister necessarily to a virtual world. We are called to minister to people who have souls that are going to live somewhere in heaven or hell. And I know there's a lot of stuff you can do. I know there's a lot of ways you can minister and reach out. But I want to say to you, you can't weep with somebody that's weeping on a screen. You can't engage in a hug with somebody on a screen. You can't really kneel down and pray eyeball to eyeball, heart to heart on a screen. And we've got to get out of this numbness. We live in this, we disengage and back off into our caves in this little virtual world when there's people just like the Good Samaritan. And these others, they didn't have a smartphone, but they passed by anyway. Because they were so busy and so preoccupied with something else. And I'm afraid that there's never been an inoculation like the inoculation of this digital age in numbing us to the spiritual, real needs of people. Right. Soul winning is at the lowest it's ever been. Because somehow we think our engagement on social media or our engagement in the electronic arena is sufficient enough. There is nothing like looking somebody eyeball to eyeball and saying to them about the gospel of Jesus Christ and asking them, inquiring them about their soul. There is no substitute. Jesus did not come via satellite. And don't you think he could have? Well, the smartphone wasn't invented yet. That technology was not invented yet. Come on, man. Give me a break. The Egyptians were doing far more with their building prowess than we've ever done. Don't you think God could have created a way to have internet before 2000? Absolutely. He didn't choose it that way. He came and humbled himself. Became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. It's about people. It's about people. Social media becomes this safe, sanitized room where we back off into. It's non-confrontational, except we can have violence, we can get mad, we can get angry, but we don't have to really face people. But we can watch the ups and downs of others as an anonymous spectator. We can just sit back and watch in our safe, sanitized room, our room of do nothing, our room of just spectator. We just want to watch and see everybody, the ups and downs, the highs and lows of their life. What are they doing when they're up? What are they doing when they're down? What catastrophes reach now? What's happened now? And we like to see that, we like to know about it, and we're all in the know, but what in the world are we doing for each other? We like to investigate, we like to troll, and we like to look, and we like to really find out and get all, but what are we doing with all this information? There's a world that needs a living, breathing human to care for them, and it cannot be done adequately through this avenue. It cannot. Look at 2 John chapter number 12. I'm sorry, verse number 12. 2 John verse 12. Second John verse 12, right next to the Revelation. Having many things to write unto you. May be full. There's some things you just can't do virtually. Remote people and concerns can command our undue attention, blinding us to the immediate needs of others. Remote people, social media, remote people and their needs can command our undue attention while we let people fly by us. Right under our noses. I mean, they're right here, just like the Good Samaritan. I mean, he saw it. He did something about it. The others, it was right there. The Levite, I mean, good night. He ought to know better. Boy, how many times do we just enter into that computer or that device or whatever it is? You could be hunting and forget about people. And God brings people into our lives to impact and influence. And we just ignore. And I'm afraid the more digitally involved we become, the less and less sensitive to the needs of others we're going to be. I'm convinced of it. The more wrapped up digitally we become, the more indifferent we become to others. We drive, our phones ping, our brains get a shot of this dopamine, and our decisions express, we neglect our own neighbor, as these men do. And we assume we can ignore the people we see in order to care for the people we don't see. Did you get that? We assume we can ignore the people we see in order to care for the people we don't see. It don't work that way. It don't work that way. It's all twisted. It's all twisted. We sin with our phones and with electronics when we ignore our neighbors, the strangers who share with us the same track of pavement, as we find in our scriptures. And I want to finish reading tonight. In verse number 28, and he said unto him, Thou hast answered right, this do, and thou shalt live. But he willingly justify himself, said unto Jesus, And who is my neighbor? And Jesus answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way. When he saw him, he passed by on the other side. I don't have time to fool with you. I'm going by on the other way. Hey, that's what we do when we go home and we get all in. We can't stay at church to fellowship with people, but we can go home and get in our little room and get on a computer. We ain't got time. We got to get home. We got to get in the bed. I got to work tomorrow. Oh, it sounds real spiritual till you go home and spend 2.5 hours on Facebook. Sounds real spiritual till you get on there and waste time looking at some gadget. And what we do is this. This is my life testimony right here. And I'm not saying I treat church members this way. But this is problems. Right here. And he's going to ask you in a minute. Let's play whack-a-mole. Here we go. I missed that one. We do that our whole life. And you know what? These guys we're trying to push back in the hole, they could care less about us. A lot of the stuff we wrap ourselves up and we get distracted to what's really important. Doesn't matter. It's not going to matter when we stand before the Lord. It is a good picture of my life sometimes, though. Problems. I get one pushed down, and guess what? Here comes another one. I get that one. Here comes another one. I get that. Here comes another one. You know, a lot of times we have stuff pop up that really don't deserve our attention.
Yes, sir. That's good. Amen.
Let it go.
Amen.
Let it go. Focus on what's important. Focus on what's important.
Amen.
Priest, the Levite, I'm going to finish it. That good Samaritan, what did he do? He got a hold of it. Verse number 33. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was. When he saw him, he had compassion on him. If he'd have been on his phone, he'd have never saw him.
That's right.
Probably run into him and knocked him over again. Saw him, he had compassion on him, went to him, bound up his wounds, poured in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him. Whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said, He that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go and do thou likewise.
Right.
Sometimes it's time just to be quiet with people.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes it's time to cry with people. Sometimes it's time to laugh with people. Neither of those 3 can you do effectively when you're distracted. Why did Jesus come? Why did he come? He wanted to die a cruel death. I mean, he wanted 2 or 3 inch thorns going in his brow. No, he died for you and for me. People. It's about people. And I understand there's a lot of things good that we can do. But a lot of times our avenue of doing them becomes our goal instead of actually helping people. The way we help them becomes our goal instead of actually doing something. We talk about doing something more than we actually do. We research doing something more than we actually do it. There's people all around us. I mean, hey, it wasn't hard yesterday, Seth. Where's Seth Whitaker at? He's with his family, I think, tonight. Yesterday we went, there you are. You back in the dark. I don't know what's happening in that corner. Did you do that and have a date night at church back here? Hey, we went up to that door, and Seth did the talking. I just sit back and watched him. And Catherine, he asked her to come tomorrow. I'll be there. It wasn't hard. But I don't think she got the internet. She don't have the internet. Now, even if she did, it'd be a lot better. You can't see the boy's splint on his finger from the internet.
That's good.
right then. I know pictures. I know you're going to argue, but it does a lot better when, hey, man, what happened there? Here, come in, let me pray. Let me pray with you about that hand right quick.
Tell it, brother. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and over there in that jar's a copperhead too, he said. You didn't see that on Facebook. We watched out for that. It was dead, he said. I stayed away from the jar. And then she came today and got saved.
Amen.
It's about people.
Hallelujah.
Be careful. Be careful. And I know we try to excuse it and we try to say you got to have a presence on. So I know all about that. But there's no substitute for people.
Yes, sir.
Weeping with them, laughing with them,
Yes, sir.
being quiet with them. There's no substitute.
Right.
May God help us not to be so distracted. And He puts people in our lives. I've been guilty of it. If you get on the elevator at the hospital, and I'm done. You know the best way not to talk to nobody? Just put your face in your phone. Nobody's going to talk to you. I don't think that's the way to be pleasing to the Lord. God just put somebody on that elevator for you to talk to. Where are they going to go between 2 and 6? We got to organize our world here. Hold on just a minute. It's about people.